Hello and welcome to another Dead by Daylight video. Today we're doing a different kind of video. Usually I do gameplay or a deep dive into a specific killer, but I'm going to be doing a more discussion based video today, so you can leave your thoughts in the comments or anything I might have missed out on, based on the killer's regular movement speed. So let's get right into it, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so as I'm sure most of you know, the killers of Dead by Daylight have two base movement speeds. They can either be 4.6 meters per second, which is usually what it is, or 115% movement speed, or they can be 4.4 meters per second, which is only for a few killers, but that can also be said as 110% movement speed as well. And as a reference point, survivors move at 4 meters per second or 100% movement speed. So both killers do not move much quicker than the survivors. They only move 10 or 15% without anything that increases or decreases the speed. And as I'm sure you've gathered by the thumbnail, I think another movement speed, which could be sat in the middle at 4.5 meters per second or 112.5% movement speed, which I'll just be calling 112% movement speed because it's more simple to say, could actually be a viable choice in balance, because obviously the speed of a killer is part of the balance. It's not just about their power. For example, Huntress, her speed is 110, but she's compensated by that because she can hit people across the map theoretically with a hatchet. So she's limited in movement speed, but she makes up for it with the power. And I think that with a few factors, they could, behavior, people that develop the game could implement this in and have certain killers be this movement speed, if they are considered to be maybe too weak at 110 or too strong at 115%. So let's get right into the factors. So one major factor that goes into a killer's movement speed, I think, is the actual strength of their power. I think that the stronger the killer is, the slower they should be, with general movement speed, but keeping it limited so it's not too complex. Obviously, you've got Nurse, widely considered to be the strongest killer in the game by pretty much everyone across all regions, across all styles of play. She is extremely strong, and she has a base movement speed which is actually slower than survivors. And then you have Huntress, who at the start of the game, when she first came out, I would say she had one of the strongest powers in the game, and because of that she was 110% movement speed. And I think there are some killers that are 115% movement speed and don't belong there. They should be slower than that. And I think there are some killers that are 110% movement speed and they don't belong there. They should be quicker than that. But changing their speed to the other value would make them either too strong or too weak. So I think factoring in not just the strength of the power, but also how else they can get around the map, because a Huntress is going to get around the map a lot slower than a Trapper, because Trapper is 5% quicker. If you were to walk across, let's say the length of Mount Ormond Resort, you were to walk across that as a Huntress, it would take you longer than it would if you were to walk across as a Trapper, which makes sense because Trapper is 5% quicker. And then you have killers like Blight and Hillbilly who move extremely quick and also have a base movement speed of 115%. So having the quickest base movement speed in the game on top of an already really strong power for not just mobility but also chase. You know, Hillbilly and Blight, they have very good chase powers, right? Their powers are really good for chase. They can end chases really, really quickly. But then they're also 115% movement speed, which makes it possible for them to just walk up to you, hit you with a basic attack, and then, well, this is more Blight, but he can walk up to you, hit you with a basic attack, and then instantly rush at you. And you can't really get anywhere. You have to sort of already be at a loop, or there has to be a loop right there, which you can get to within the time that it takes for him to recover, so before he can use his power. And if you can't get that, then let's just say the Blight doesn't miss, then you have like a 10-second chase and there isn't really much you can do about that. You know, it's less with Hillbilly because obviously his chainsaw is an insta-down. He doesn't have to basic attack you at all. He can just rev his chainsaw right on your back and then down you straight away. But I think that, you know, some killers should be buffed up to 112.5, or some killers should be nerfed down to 112. I think it is a viable, I'd say it's a viable speed. When I play Survivor, I use Made for this a lot, which it's not 2.5, it's 3%, but being 3% quicker against a 115% speed killer, it's nearly 112.5% speed. It's not quite, it's 112, but that 0.5% speed is so minuscule, the odds of it having an effect on gameplay is so little. And I think if you use Made for this, you would understand it makes looping killers a little bit easier, which obviously makes sense because you're quicker, but I'm also mean against, you know, a Blight. A Blight can't just walk up to you and hit you as easy because you're 3% quicker. So imagine that, but in reverse. Instead of you being 3% quicker, he's, you know, 2.5. So, but, you know, such a small difference. % slower than he currently is. It would make it so he can still walk you down on a majority of loops, but he can't do it everywhere. He can't do it like he can now. You know, there's no downside really to picking Blight. It's not like it's not like you pick Blight, but you have to use his power every single time, where you'd never catch up to survivors. You can catch up to survivors by walking up to them or by using your power. And I think if you were to take Blight and make him a 110% movement speed killer, he would be considerably weaker than he currently is, because making him 110% movement speed pretty much removes his ability to walk down survivors. You know, it's going to make it a lot harder to pull that off, because that 5% doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. It matters. It matters so much, that 5%. You know, imagine trying to play Huntress with no hatchets. It's so much harder than trying to play Trapper with no traps. Like, that's how much that 5% difference can mean. But if you were to make him 112.5, then he'd still be able to walk you down, but just not as easy as he can now. So I think that's my case for Blight. I'll bring it up. I'll bring up something else in another section if I forget anything. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through some killers. Hopefully I don't spend as long on all these killers, because this would be an extremely long video. But I'm gonna go through a few killers including new one, including the ghoul, and make my case as to why I think they should be buffed from 110% to 112.5%, or nerfed from 115 to 112.5%. And yeah, let's move into the hillbilly next. Okay, so the hillbilly is a killer I've already done a deep dive on, so if you don't really know what he does, then you can go and watch that. But long story short, he has a chainsaw, he revs it up for a short amount of time, and then he starts to run really, really quickly. That's the main portion of the power I'm going to be focusing on. He can insta down with his chainsaw, but it's not the part where I'm worried about particularly. It's more so he can rev this chainsaw and then move around the map really, really quickly. So I think making him 110% movement speed, I think that would make him quite a bit weaker than he currently is. Because making him 110% movement speed, it's not going to affect his getting around the map, because it's not going to affect the speed of his chainsaw, it's just going to affect his walking speed. But in chase, it would make him extremely over-reliant on his chainsaw, and I wouldn't want that, because I don't want any killer to ever have to be over-reliant on the power they have. You know, they should have an option to not use it if it's too difficult. You know, for example, if the loop is a bit of an odd shape, like some of the Coldwind hay bale loops, you can't really use your chainsaw around them too much, because they're not quite straight, but they're not quite circular either. They're not quite as circular as, let's say, I don't know, some of the Crotus Pren rock loops, but they're not quite as straight as some of the Autohaven Wrecker car loops, for example. And so he does need to be a certain movement speed against those kind of loops, because he can't really use his chainsaw that well around them. And so they went with 115, because, you know, obviously when they released him, he, you know, 110% speed wasn't a thing yet, because he came out when the game came out. But he also, you know, I'm sure when 110% movement speed came out, I'm sure someone at Behaviour considered making him 110% movement speed, but then they realised, well, he's not really that strong if he's completely 100% over-reliant on his chainsaw. If his chainsaw is all he has, then I don't really think he's that good. I think if his chainsaw is everything, if he can't walk down survivors on those kind of loops, if he literally just has to walk around the loop at a 110% movement speed, then that is just too much time that he's spending, and then he has to break the pallet, and then he has to catch up to the survivor, and then they might end up being at another kind of loop like that, and then there isn't really anything he can do, because he's just got to do it all over again. But being 112%, that would mean that he's quick enough to the point where it would be, you know, one or two less loops than 110% movement speed, but maybe an extra loop or two than 115%. And then that makes it possible for him to not be spending too much time on loops while also not being too oppressive. It's not, you know, it removes his ability to just easily walk down the stronger loops against him until they're eventually just gone. But it doesn't remove his ability to to walk down those loops effectively. He can still do it. It will take longer than it does now. But, you know, he's still extremely strong. He's still able to traverse the map, you know, in seconds. He can traverse the longest map in the game from end to end in like 10 seconds maybe. I don't know. I've not actually done it myself, but I know he's quick. That's all I know. And you know, I'm not trying to claim that I'm the best at these killers. I'm not the best at Hillbilly. I'm not the best at Blight. I'm not the best at the other killers I'm going to mention. But I think that these killers, you know, there's a reason. There's a reason Blight and Billy are often both considered to be the second strongest killer in the game. I personally think the Hillbilly edges it out just a little bit, but that's for another video. There's a reason that everyone in the community, or nearly everyone in the community, agrees that the second strongest killer is Blight or is Hillbilly, and it's very rare that someone else is considered the second best. But, you know, one of them is the second best, one of them is the third best, and that is generally correct. So, yeah, let's move on to the next killer, who's actually the killer that's not even come out yet, the Ghoul. So, as I'm sure most of you know, the next killer is Ken Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul, and in short, his power is like a mix between Legion, Blight, and Nurse. So, I'm sure you can already tell. You know, Nurse is slower than Survivors, and Blight I want to be made 112. So I'm sure you can see why he is here, why I think he should be made 112. In the test build, he was 115% movement speed. And originally, in the first day of the test build or so, I did think that he was quite weak because he couldn't down with his power without the use of a glitch, which I'm sure is going to be removed by the time he's in the game. So I just sort of threw him to the side. I thought, oh, he's going to be pretty weak. But people started to discover, maybe on the second, third, or fourth day of the PTB, that he's actually quite strong. His movement is one of the best in the game. You know, it's the best or the second best in like 99% of scenarios. It's really good for chase because he can cancel his power. His power pretty much it's like Blight, where you sort of have to hit the environment, but instead it's sort of like a grapple where you hit the environment with like a tentacle and you just get pulled towards it and then you slide. It's fairly hard to explain now that I'm actually thinking about it. And I don't have any gameplay of him, so I hope I've explained it well. But you slide, and it's similar also to Blight, where you have to use one tentacle and then you use your second one that actually allows you to injure the survivors. You can't just injure them on the very first go. But his movement speed is crazy good. It's actually really good in chase because it's really nice for catching up. You can catch up to survivors really, really easily. Because of how quick you move. You know, you can hit someone and then you can grapple up to them. And then because you can cancel your power as well, you don't have to use a second one or wait for a dash. or wait for the dash to end, you can prematurely cancel it. So you can hit a survivor, get right up to them with your power, and then you cancel it, and it's actually fairly quick, the time that it takes for you to cancel it. It's a very short amount of time, and you also move maybe not quite as quick as 115, but you still move quicker than survivors, so you stay corpse. Now, I think he should be 112.5 for the same reasons Blight should. I think he shouldn't be able to easily walk you down while also having that good of a power to catch up. And this is going to be a short one, because again, he's new. He's not even out yet. He comes out the 2nd, and the date of recording this is the 28th. So he comes out in like 4 days. So he's just not even out yet. And they probably will change him. They've already said they're going to make one of his add-ons at least partially base kit. So who knows what else they could do. This part of the video might become irrelevant because they might make him a lot weaker, or they might actually just make him 110% movement speed but buff his power. Like, I don't necessarily know, but of PTB Ghoul, I think he should be made 112% movement speed for the same reasons Blight should. So I'm not going to be spending too much time on him. This is it. Yeah, let's move on to the next person. Okay, so this is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you'll leave your thoughts in the comments, anything I might have missed, anything you think about maybe some other killers. Obviously, I only mentioned killers that I think should be nerfed down to 112. So maybe you could think of any that could be nerfed, that could be buffed up, or more that could be nerfed down. Whatever, it's your choice. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you'll take what I said into consideration, I suppose. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one.